Good morning and good afternoon, and especially morning for those on the West Coast. So good to see everybody today. For those on the East Coast, I hope you're all wearing your mask because we need it. The panelists and I were just talking about how smoggy the air is because of the wildfires. So I hope everybody is staying safe. It is so good to see everybody today. My name is Les Williams. I moderate our panels at Sunny Day Fund that take place about monthly or once every other month on very topical items. And I'm so thrilled today to talk to everybody and lead this panel on behavioral science, especially as it relates to savings. So in this webinar, we're going to hear from practitioners and researchers about how we can leverage behavioral science to foster these techniques of saving and also financial well-being. Do not worry. I'm going to start by giving a definition of what is emergency savings, but I'm also going to give a definition of behavioral science because that's really important to do. Before I begin, I want to cover some housekeeping items. Please use the chat function. This is going to be very interactive. The panelists are excited to speak with one another and also to answer your questions. So please use that. I will be monitoring that as well as the panelists and some other people on my team. At the end of the webinar, I am going to have a slide deck that is going to give their LinkedIn profiles as well as their company names. So make sure you take a screenshot of that, and we will record this webinar as well, and it will be disseminated. So just know you will have a chance to follow up individually with these folks. So please make sure you do that. So quick background for those who don't know me or haven't interacted with me yet. I am the Director of Partnerships at Sunny Day Fund. I am also an investor in this amazing company. When you go to my LinkedIn profile, people scratch their head because they say, well, Les, you're a co-founder of an insurance brokerage firm. Yes, I'm that too. I wear many hats. But about 8 years ago, I co-founded an insurance brokerage firm. We do property and casualty and also employee benefits. And I know that workplace emergency savings and savings in general is a big issue with a lot of my clients. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to lead these webinars, and also to join the team at Sunny Day Fund. Interestingly enough, the blue and orange background, that's probably a giveaway. But I, like the CEO and founder of Sunny Day Fund, Sid Pila, I'm a UVA graduate, University of Virginia, hence the blue and orange. But I teach a class on business for engineers. And one of the topics we cover is savings. So I make sure that all students in my class understand savings, what it means, and how to do that and how to effectively execute that. So I'm very thrilled. Another reason to be speaking with you all today. So I'm going to first start off with some definitions. Then we're going to go to a panel discussion. That's going to be the majority of what we're going to talk about. And then I will leave 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. But keep in mind, as we're going through this panel discussion, there's already going to be some Q&A that we will cover. So it will kind of merge into one nice little presentation webinar that will take place for about an hour, and I'll try to get you guys out of here right at 1 p.m. Eastern. So hope that sounds like a good plan. So first, let me start with this. The definition of emergency savings, especially workplace emergency savings. So at Sunny Day Fund, we define it as a financial benefit that enables employers to send money directly from their paycheck into a separate, simple, and unrestricted account. More broadly, workplace emergency savings is a program that also includes employer contributions. That's an important part of it, financial education, and coaching. Now, the purpose is to provide a financial cushion so that employees can bounce back quickly from any unforeseen emergencies, i.e. flat tire, emergency repair for plumbing in the house, those types of issues. We're trying to get employees to avoid this high interest debt that comes up with putting things on credit cards, or God forbid, something like an unsecured loan or a payday loan. Certified financial planners, you'll hear them talk a lot about having enough money to cover at least 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, such as housing, food, and utilities. And we find that that's a good amount. So 3 to 6 months on hand is what's recommended. Because we know the data is pretty scary out there, and this number will be burned into everybody's head. The average American family doesn't have $400 to dip into to cover these emergencies. Finally, the main difference between emergency savings and just having a generic savings account, remember, it's just the purpose for which the money is used. So emergency account, that's used for unexpected expenses like I talked about beforehand. Whereas savings, that's more longer term savings for other things, whether you're saving for a college education for your children, saving for a new car. So, but emergency savings is things that are unexpected that will come up, because the only thing that you can expect about life is that you will have unexpected expenses. So just that's my broad definition. Now, one more thing before I go into the definition of behavioral science. I wanted to mention that for those that are joining us, I know there's several insurance brokers that have been asked a lot about workplace emergency savings. It acts like group life. So what's been tough for people to understand is that a lot of people say, well, Les, instead of just an emergency savings through a plan like Sunny Day Fund, what if I just go have my employees go to a high yield, savings account like Capital One or Marcus by Goldman Sachs? Those are great. You look at 4% to 4.5% savings, but as an individual, an employee has to qualify for those. There is underwriting, right? And many employees can't qualify because of not meeting account minimums or, not having the proper credit checks. But a workplace emergency savings, such as Sunny Day Fund, it's like group life insurance. Most employers these days do offer group life insurance where there's no medical underwriting at all. That is what an effective workplace emergency savings strategy has. All employees are included and nobody is left out. It's so important because the average American falls in that low to moderate income category where they need that financial cushion. Think janitors, teachers, firefighters, policemen, sanitation workers, hospital staff, retail workers. That's a large majority of this country. And so if we can create an environment that's more financially resilient for them, then as a whole, we will be better off. Now let's switch to behavioral science. And I had to pull this up from the University of Chicago on this one. So the definition of behavioral science is, and I'm going to actually read this so I don't get it wrong. It's the study of human behavior through the use of systematic experimentation and observation. Behavioral scientists study when and why individuals engage in specific behaviors by experimentally examining the impact of factors such as conscious thought, motivation, social influences, contextual effects, and habits. So now that we know what the definition of workplace emergency savings is and behavioral science, we're going to have an insightful panel discussion talking about how these two ideas coexist and how they interconnect. So now I'm going to bring on my panelists one by one. It's my honor, of course, ladies first. I want to introduce you to Leigh Phillips. She's the president and CEO of SaverLife. Leigh, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Les. Thanks so much for having me. Excited for the conversation.
Awesome. And most people, of course, can Google SaverLife on the website on their own, but can you give a brief commercial about what SaverLife does?
Absolutely. So SaverLife is a nonprofit financial technology and advocacy organization focused on improving the financial health of people living paycheck to paycheck. So at the heart of what we do is encouraging people to save frequently through price-linked savings, cash rewards, different types of challenges. We also do a lot of financial content for our members, as well as referrals to products and services and things that help people improve their financial health. So we've reached about 600,000 people across the country, mostly women. Average income is around $30,000 a year, and are really focused on both helping individual people to improve their financial health, but also to really take a close look at the systemic issues that make it so difficult for so many people to save.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And you guys can see just by Leigh's definition, that's why we're so close, because we're targeting the same demographic, and that is what we want to do to promote financial resilience. So thank you so much, Leigh. Next, we have Brian Gilmore. He's the vice president of Commonwealth. How you doing, Brian?
Well, Les, and yeah, thanks for having us on this conversation as well.
Yeah, definitely. For the folks out there listening who've never heard of Commonwealth, want to give a brief commercial for us, like Leigh?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a national nonprofit, and we are committed to building financial security and opportunity for financially vulnerable people through innovation and partnerships. Really, our mission is to make it possible for all people to build wealth. The way we do that is really by collaborating with people living on low and moderate incomes, employers, innovators, financial service industry, fintechs, workplace benefit providers, a whole host of partners to build solutions that make financial security and wealth possible for those folks living on low and moderate incomes. We're doing rigorous research to find original insights to address the challenges that financially vulnerable people face, designing, scaling, and amplifying solutions that are effective in addressing those challenges. And again, doing that in partnership with a whole host of private, public, and nonprofit partners. And emergency savings has been a major focus of our portfolio of work, particularly as part of our participation in BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative. And I'll just note, so that's been an initiative running over the last 4 years. And if you keep an eye on our website, you'll see a report coming out that documents some of the insights and findings from those last 4 years of working with 2 other great nonprofit organizations and many partners to try to address this emergency savings challenge. So keep an eye out for that.
Awesome. Thank you. And similar to Leigh, everybody on this webinar can see why we work closely with a group like Commonwealth. Again, we're targeting the same demographic. And I just noticed this, Brian, the wealth actually kind of goes up kind of like your money, correct? That was the L, the T, and the H kind of take off, right? That's like a graph going up.
Exactly. Like absolutely. Yeah. It is. It's a journey. We know that savings is the start of that journey, but really on that pathway to wealth for all. So we had some great support in creating a logo that tries to reflect that journey that folks are on.
I love that. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And welcome again, Brian. And Adam Zuckerberg from Western and Southern, a fellow kind of an insurance guy like me. How you doing, Adam?
Hi, good. Thank you very much, Les. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to have you. You want to tell us a little bit about W&S?
Sure. So I'm at Western and Southern Financial Group in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Western Southern is a large insurance carrier, one of the largest in the world. We're very excited. Just this week alone, we found out that we moved up about 58 spots on the Fortune 500 list. So we're number 314 right now. So that was great news for the company. So recently, over the last few years, we decided to get into the employer benefits space. So I joined the company and wanted to get into that space in an innovative and differentiated way. So teamed up with an insurtech startup company to create voluntary life insurance products that are, again, innovative and differentiated out there for employers. So yeah, it's been going very well, been resonating, no cost to the companies, as well as little to no administrative work, and able to offer an in-demand product to the employees of the company. So yeah, we were just starting our employer benefits group, and it's going well so far. So thank you.
That's great. And next time, I know Sid and I have been trying to schedule in person with you, but next time we see you, given that big jump in the Fortune 500 list, dinner will be on you.
Yes. Love it. Can't wait.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Adam. We can't wait to hear more from you. And last but not least, Sid Pila, the CEO and founder of Sunny Day Fund. How you doing, Sid?
I'm doing quite well, Les. Thank you for having me. And Leigh, Adam, Brian, excited for this conversation with you all and learning from you.
Awesome. That's great. And everybody knows a lot about Sunny Day Fund, and you will hear more about it later. So I'll kind of jump right into the meat of this panel discussion. And I'll pose this first question, and we'll kind of go in order of appearance: Leigh, Brian, Adam, and then Sid. Leigh, from the perspective of your daily work, why is it so important for Americans, why is it so difficult for Americans to save today?
Thanks, Les. And I actually appreciate the way that you asked that question, right? Because I think when you work in the field that we work in, you're kind of looking at two questions. And I think that one's the more important one. But first is, how do we help people to save? Because we know it's so critically important to household financial stability and wealth building. But the underlying question really is, why is it so difficult for so many people to save money in the first place? And it can be easy to jump to things like, it's a discipline problem or it's a knowledge problem, but really, it's a money problem, right? Like that's kind of what we're talking about. So, in the words of our our SaverLife members, who we have, we engage with frequently about the challenges that they're facing, we ask them what their top barriers were to saving and economic mobility. And the first thing, of course, is insufficient and inconsistent income. So, people making low wages, not having wage supplements like benefits and other things. And those also play out in terms of wage inconsistency. So for a lot of people who are hourly wage workers or self-employed or gig workers, you're seeing pretty big fluctuations month over month in people's actual income. And that makes it very difficult, not only for people to cover their expenses, but to plan ahead and to set aside money for saving. The second thing, of course, is that the cost of living are high for folks. And of course, that again is exacerbated if your income's inconsistent. That can trigger debt cycles. And, obviously, people with lower credit scores or lower incomes may be paying more for things that people with higher incomes are paying less for. So you have this kind of perfect storm between insufficient, inconsistent income and higher costs of living. The third thing, which I think is really relevant to our conversation today, is not having financial products and services that are well designed to meet the needs of people who have live with low to moderate incomes. And so this kind of plays out throughout the financial system, whether or not you're talking about checking accounts, credit and debt products, or savings products. And I think that what we've kind of done, in some ways, is we haven't designed products for everybody, right? We've designed them for people who have consistent incomes and whose incomes routinely exceed their expenses, right? Like that is what most of the financial system is designed for. So people who are able to stay on track, make things like consistent deposits, pay credit card bills on time on a fixed schedule. And that's not actually the financial reality for too many people in this country. And that's why I think this conversation is so important, because what we're trying to do here is think about, well, if we were going to design, and I think technology actually gives us the ability to do this now, if we're going to design something that worked well, or design products that can work well for a greater diversity of people and their circumstances, what does that look like? And of course, we can't gloss over the root cause problems, right, of people not having enough, because that really is at the heart of what we're talking about. But within that context, what is the role of the financial sector in being able to design things that actually put people on a path to wealth building as opposed to wealth stripping, which unfortunately is what we've been seeing? And how do we center users, right? And I think that's what the tech world has done so well, is to center users and individuals and really design for them, as opposed to trying to change people to fit into existing products and services. So that's my take.
Yeah, no, thank you, Leigh. And I wrote those down. And the wage inconsistency, I just want to touch on that real quick, because and Sid knows this, I'm a fan of ride sharing. My wife and I, we both have a car, but I don't like driving, especially in the DC area. So I'm always on Metro. I'm walking. I take Uber, Lyft. Pre and post pandemic, several Uber drivers that I've spoken to, before the pandemic, they used Uber or Lyft as a way to supplement their income. And they liked it so much. Sometimes I'll get the same drivers and I'll say, well, how's it going? And they said, oh, it's great. I quit my job where I was making a steady paycheck. Now I can be my own boss and drive for Lyft and Uber exclusively. And I say, well, that's great. They said, yeah, I own my own flexible schedule. But what I wasn't aware of is that my income could be great one week and the next week it tanks. From the gig workers that you're speaking to, are you seeing that as well? Are you seeing an even more focused on them? Because yes, they have the freedom from not being in an office and being in their own boss, but do they have the skills to learn how to set aside that money for when times are tough, especially, the first 2 months of the pandemic when nobody was driving? Can you dig down that rabbit hole for me a little bit, Leigh?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the challenge here is that, as the economy shifts, we're shifting more burden onto workers, right, and less burden onto employers. And I think that's kind of the dynamic that you're describing. So if you are someone who is self-employed by choice or otherwise, some people embrace self-employment or gig work, and other people, that's the designation that they're given in their profession. The burden is really on you, not only to be able to manage your income, but also like your taxes and all the other things, right, that don't get taken out of a paycheck. Yeah. You also don't have access to benefits and all these other things. So the financial picture actually becomes a lot more complicated for people who are working in the gig economy. SaverLife put out a report earlier this year on micro-entrepreneurship. So really looking at people who earned some or all of their income from self-employment. And one of the things that we found is, first off, people are co-mingling their personal and their business expenses, right? And income. So everything's going into one account. So there's not that separation of, this is what I make in my business and this is what I can spend. And where that also plays out is when we think about taxes, right? So we found that the majority of people that we surveyed, over 50%, were not viewing themselves as self-employed if they were gig workers or similar. So they weren't taking those deductions, for mileage or gas or other things that you could do if you were an Uber driver. So I think one of the things that, again, is important about financial technology and our approach is direct to consumer is we can also deliver the kind of information and content that people really need to know. So, we did a content series earlier during tax season, congratulating people on being entrepreneurs and saying, here are the deductions and things that you can take. So it's really important that we are taking that big picture view. The last thing I'll say on that, though, is it's not just gig workers who are impacted by income volatility, right? Like, many hourly wage workers do not have predictable schedules at their jobs, whether you work in retail or whether or not you work in, a restaurant or whatever the case may be. And I hope Sid will comment a little bit, because I know in our experience, and Brian as well, it's really hard to reach those workers, even if they do have a stable employer. People that don't work at desks and desk jobs and email and things like that. So I think there's an outreach challenge too in some of these. Some of the efforts that we're trying to promote.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer, Leigh. I really appreciate that. And I wrote down those 3 facts as well. I'm going to embed that in my brain. Brian, what about you? Why is it so difficult, in your opinion and from your experience, for Americans to save?
Yeah, and Leigh hit on a lot of the fundamental challenges that animate our work. I'll talk a little bit from sort of a behavioral standpoint. If you think about what savings is, it is future focused, right? So it's looking out into the future, and that is a challenge from a psychological standpoint to focus on the future versus the present. So I think it's important to just acknowledge that just as people, we generally are not great at prioritizing the future over the present. Yeah. And also from a product design and user experience standpoint, savings is generally presented as self-sacrifice, delayed gratification. It is not very rewarding of an experience in general. So when you think about the experience that someone has trying to save, it doesn't feel as good. And that's not a requirement of the experience. It's just sort of how products and experiences have been designed, so that, not having a sort of positive experience or feeling with the effort of saving is, I think, an aspect that makes it challenging that could be addressed through product design. I think the last thing that I would touch on is that savings can be full of friction too. And friction is a term that you'll hear in behavior science, but really just saying like a lot of steps that someone has to take to get from something they want to do to something that they're able to do. And I think building off of a point that Leigh was making about volatile income, if you've ever tried to set up a recurring savings deposit for your own, savings account, usually you have to pick a day of the month. And so hopefully on the 15th, I have enough money to automatically move from my checking to savings account. But if that's not aligned with how you're getting paid, when money's coming in, what the account balance looks like, that's a really hard automated setting to decide on, to set up, etc. Similar for if your workplace offers split deposit into multiple accounts. If you've ever tried to set that up, there's no guarantee that that's an easy process to do. So do you have your savings account number? Do you know where to go on your workplace benefits platform to set that up? How much should you choose to save? Is it a dollar amount or a percentage? There's many steps and decisions that need to happen to get on that savings habit. And the more steps you put in front of someone from wanting to save, but actually being able to save, especially in the context of volatile income and not always having a clear amount that you could save on a regular basis, that just makes it really hard to easily set that up. And so, one thing we should be thinking about is just how to make it easier for people to move from the intention to save, which the vast majority of people have regardless of their income levels, to that action of saving and actually being able to start on that or continue that habit.
Yeah, you bring up good points, and that friction point's interesting, Brian. I know the panelists know this, and several people listening may know this as well, but the underbanked, and it does fall into the category of the people that many of us service in our day-to-day lives, they sometimes incur penalties of every time they make a phone call to move money around, it's $2 that it costs to take out of their account, sometimes $2.50. So that friction can be good in some cases. We'll talk about that later, but you're right, in some cases, Brian, they can be punished from that perspective. And so I also underline what Leigh said, you hit on it too, not having enough financial products that cater to this demographic, which is really an important part. So thank you so much for that, Brian. Before we move on to Adam, I'll just address some things in the chat. Jervis, thank you so much on the Secure Act 2.0 and how Sunny Day Fund will integrate with the new emergency savings accounts. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll have Sid touch on that later in the presentation. And you're right, Jervis, right what Leigh was saying about, how can employers take back some of that responsibility to help some of these folks. Colorado, yes, I read about that law. They are considering a law that requires businesses to guarantee a number of hours so that people can plan for a minimum amount of income. So very, very important stuff. Thank you so much, Jervis, for those contributions. We'll move on to Adam now. How are you doing, Adam? And from Cincinnati, why is it so difficult for Americans to save?
Yeah, thank you, Les. As the previous panelists touched on it, the overwhelming majority of people would like to save and want to save. So it's just a matter of how we get them there. So one of my favorite topics is the topic of inflation. And we're about 14 years into worldwide money printing. And just the unintended consequences we've seen from that are really touching the majority of the people. Just the last couple of months, we hear over and over, inflation is dropping, and kind of statistics like that. What these financial, pundits really mean is that just the rate of growth of inflation may be, dropping a little bit, but prices are still going up. Just that rate of growth is what's changing. So a lot of these big ticket items that people have as their fixed costs, their housing, food. If you have a family raising kids, doctor's bills, if somebody wants to, go on vacation, and then if your kids my age, college expenses and, things from car payments, taxes. I mean, just the fixed costs alone are really digging into people's paychecks. And that's a huge part of it. When I just think specifically about employee benefits, we used to be competing against other benefits. We look at, do you do a voluntary life or do you do an emergency savings versus what your healthcare costs are versus what some of the other benefits are. We're not just competing with other benefits now. We're competing against people wanting to go out for dinner or take a vacation, go to the grocery store. A lot of different areas right now in people's lives. Which kind of leads to the huge wealth inequality that we're seeing right now as well, where the top 10% of the people, especially obviously the top 1%, are doing so well. And then you've kind of mentioned the stats where about 2/3 of the people can't even come up with a $400 payment on for a surprise expense. So that kind of stagflation that I call it, where people's salaries and what they're making are stagnant at best for the majority of people, but their expenses are rising, is really hitting the majority of the people out there. So I know we're going to get into next some of the processes and plan designs that we can do to help people save, and even if it's a small amount, just to get them on the right track and be that cash flow positive as opposed to zero or negative is such a help for people out there.
No, thank you so much, Adam. And I underline what you said. And I'm so glad, Leigh, you set the framework for those three things you mentioned, because I underline the cost of living. And And when you said the fixed price that people are paying, that's all going up because of inflation, as we know, right? Even though inflation has cooled a little bit from what it was, especially last summer, it's still high. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because what you're seeing, like me, from an insurance brokerage perspective, is how that's impacting people. And you are right. These benefit products, we're now competing with people that are going out to eat, and there's other things that come into play. So I'm glad you kind of unwound that for us a little bit. Before we go on to Sid, one of the things that I wanted to touch on too, and we just discussed this morning. We talk about how employers can play more of a role. Sid gave an interesting statistic, and Sid, if you can talk briefly about this when you address us in a little bit. 89% of people actually don't trust their bank, but 64% of people trust their employers. So I thought that's pretty interesting. It kind of leads us right down to how employers can help play a bigger role in this idea of emergency savings. But before we get into that, Sid, from your perspective, why is it so difficult for Americans to save?
I would like to just plus one what Leigh, Brian, and Adam have already talked about. I thought that was a great summary. And I'll dive right into what you're talking about, because that was the two additional points that I was going to bring up. Trust and incentives. I think from a trust perspective, certainly from our own experience at Sunny Day Fund, as well as some of the research that we've done, at the end of the day, we have had a series of events that have created mistrust and distrust between individuals and their banking institutions. That may have been driven by surprise fees. That may have been driven by like minimum deposits, or any kind of credit checks that were run, or intentional marketing that was done for additional financial products. There's a variety of different reasons, right? And it was not necessarily out of malintent out of banks either. It's not something that they said like, hey, we have to like abuse our power, right? I think that it happened a bit more naturally. Regardless of that, people do have a tendency to distrust banks right off the bat. And when I say people, in this case, I am talking about those that are underbanked, unbanked, that do have a tendency to be women, people of color, including communities like immigrants, Native Americans, and recently incarcerated as well. So that distrust can also become an asset, especially if you're an employer, because at the end of the day, think about how much time they're spending with you, if nothing else. Think about the 8 hours a day, or even if it is volatile hours, purposeful amount of time and exchange of services that they're providing through you that are creating that building that trust slowly and surely over time. And that's much more than a transactional feature. Leigh talked about how the income volatility doesn't exist in just the contractor workforce. It exists in retail work. It exists specifically in the quick service restaurant industry, and even in healthcare. That's a challenge that we've had to design around on our side, like thinking through, deduction priorities. How does that work? How do we make sure that there is a decision that was made by an individual and we support that decision? And in the background, and from a systems perspective, we're working through that. So I think that Adam will Brian will touch on the choice architecture element of that. Incentives. I keep reminding people that the national average savings interest rate is 0.4%, or just about, according to the FDIC. Inflation is over 10 times that. So when people are not saving, let's put on your economist hat. They're actually doing the rational thing, right? They're a rational actor when they are choosing to spend money because their savings account is losing money compared to inflation. That is true. But I think this is where we can be innovative. And I think that, again, yet another place where the workplace, and it doesn't need to be a workplace, right? It can be a private sponsor, it can be a nonprofit. I think that Leigh will talk about some of the gamification components that over here SaverLife because it's fascinating, and where we're providing truly an economic incentive that has been missing in the private market, and reintroducing that alongside all of these emotional elements, as well as the behavior elements that we can build on. So those are the two things: trust and incentives from my side of why people are not saving today.
No, that's fantastic. And I actually just got a direct message from Jennifer, and we'll go to Leigh first on this one, then we'll go to Brian and Adam. But Jennifer says, you mentioned, gamification and how to get people motivated to actually save. Can you talk a little bit, Leigh, about what you're seeing and what initiatives that you put in place to get people to save? And now we're getting into more of the behavioral science of this discussion too.
I'm happy to say a little bit about that, and then I'm going to turn it to Brian, because a lot of what we do at SaverLife is actually came from Commonwealth, and a lot of the work that they pioneered around price-linked savings and actually helped us design the early versions of our product, and really, I think, put the evidence out there that made something that didn't necessarily seem intuitive more mainstream, right? And so I think that kind of heart of why it works is that, it makes saving money engaging and fun and keeps it top of mind for people. As Brian alluded to, I think saving money is something that everyone wants to do tomorrow, right? So how do you make it immediate? And again, tech can really help with that, right? Like you can see the ad, you can sign up immediately, you can use your best intentions to your advantage. And then for us, in a practical sense, we do a couple of things. So we do, if you save a very small amount, so that's also really important to our design, is that you can qualify to win prizes for saving as little as $5. You can do a scratch card game, which is points based. So the more points you have, the more chances you get to win. We do a monthly race. So anyone who saves $25 in a month is opted into our race, and there's different prizes for that. So that's another thing. We do a lot of work around tax time that involves pledging, so making that pre-commitment to save, and then actually saving. So we do a lot of work on those elements as well. But I feel I'm really speaking out of turn, so I'm going to hand it to Brian and ask him.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for the question too, Jennifer. Brian.
Happy to jump in. I mean, I think, Leigh, you touched on a lot of the mechanics and ways to do this. I think it just goes back to the point I was making earlier of that there's ways to make savings feel fun and rewarding. Those can be intangible incentives and rewards, like just celebrating a savings moment. Robinhood got in hot water for having confetti fall down when you make an investment on their retail investing platform. But that's a meaningful thing for some folks, just to feel celebrated if they take a savings action. Confetti, a funny GIF or an image that says, this was a good thing that you did. Congratulations. We know it's not easy, and you're doing a great job. So those sort of intangible engagements are really meaningful. The prize-based model, where there's this exciting chance to win a prize, even a small one. People have been trained in the lottery context to be excited by that, and so you can leverage that to make saving money feel just as exciting as spending money. And it goes down to that product design. And then I think I'll share a report in the chat about incentives overall, just the idea of employers putting some skin in the game too. So if you're asking someone to save, putting the first $5, $10, $25 into that account to get started and say, we're on this journey with you, having a match, for some period of time. And, we know matches can get costly over time. So that's where prizes can come in and allow you to sort of manage that incentive budget. But the idea of the employer putting more money in people's pockets if they are saving as well. We already do that in the retirement sector. Why not apply that to the emergency savings side of thing? And that goes a long way to make, savings feel positive, rewarding, rather than that, self-sacrifice, delayed gratification, sort of future focused. If you get a $25 deposit into your account today for setting aside some of your money, you've just gotten, some instant gratification, and that's really powerful.
Oh, that's great. And it's funny, Sid and I were just talking about something that you just mentioned, and I want to bring you in on this, especially when we're talking about prompting employees, for example, by having an employer kind of kickstart that off. You want to comment on that briefly for our discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Leigh and Brian, sharing about that. I think that the incentives piece is a really important part of the picture. And actually, I've been blown away by the number of employers that want to do this as well. I have seen from some employers see it as a financial justice issue, from other employers as like, of course, this is exactly what we're doing on the 401k side. Why would we do something else? And I think that this kind of speaks to the some of the things that we've also seen from the Federal Reserve's recent study on worker voices. Essentially, there's an expectation, right? There's a new expectation around, hey, look, I understand that about half a century ago, you've prompted us as individual employees to start saving for retirement. And about 20 years ago, you've prompted us as employees to start saving for our health. Like, do you realize that at the end of the day, we don't have that $400 that you keep measuring our statistics on? And as a result of that, we need help doing that too. And employers are seeing that. It's like, yes, we need to meet this. We need to have skin in the game. I love that you've mentioned that. And I think that we've seen a lot of creative ways as well. So of course, the sign-up bonuses are great. The price link savings are great. We've also seen, your traditional match-based approach, which is, you put X number of dollars in, someone else puts in X number of dollars. And I'm seeing someone else here because it doesn't always have to be the employer. It could be, like, for example, a workforce development board that's passionate about its respective constituency. The other two creative ones that we've seen, milestones and also just balances, right? Encouraging people to reach certain balance-based milestones so that at the end of the day, you are incentivizing people to not just put money in to saving, but also keeping that there, because I think that is really the next frontier, especially if you have a way to get people to, save in the first place and making it easy and accessible. Then the next piece is making sure that they're thinking twice about, hey, am I taking this out for something that I intended to save it for or something else? I'm curious what Adam thinks about this, especially given his former life in the world of 401k. I know that automatic enrollment was something that was instrumental to getting broader adoption in the world of 401k as well. So maybe I'll kick it over to him here.
Yeah, thank you, Sid. So how I look at it is each family's goals are different when it comes to saving, depending on where you are in life. So I have 3 kids, a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, and 10-year-old. My, situation's very different from an empty nester family or somebody that just graduated college and is just, starting out working and starting to save. It could certainly be very overwhelming to hear, somebody's maybe living paycheck to paycheck that they have to save $1.5 million for, their current living situation and college costs and retirement savings. Just an overwhelming number. So how I look at it is it's really about overcoming biases. The largest bias that we just all come across every day is just inertia. People just doing nothing. Oh, I haven't saved for that. Money is tight. I'm just going to continue not saving. That's just the easiest path. So overcoming that inertia is something that we have to deal with. Other biases, just people thinking, I can't save. There's just not enough money there. Then too much uncertainty out there, whether it's with their job or with the economy or with their family. So a whole list of uncertainties out there. So plenty of emotional, psychological, social decisions out there that people think about and make on a daily basis. So, the majority of people need some type of catalyst. So as you mentioned, there's plan designs, there's policies that could be created. The one I love and just the easiest one is some automation. The 401k world, as you mentioned, put in auto enrollment, which helped tremendously. People have to opt out instead of opting in. The take rates have just been astronomical and been very helpful over the years with that auto enrollment. So, you're seeing 80+% of the people staying in. We're only at, a handful opt out of that, basically due to inertia. You have to do something to opt out. So that's one way. And then to just, you start small to slowly increase an auto escalation, have a 1% increase every year. cap it at a certain number so it doesn't get too high. These are all things that have been proven to help and work in the past. So creating that catalyst to overcome just the natural biases that people have, it's something that we, it's something that's available and something that, we're talking about and looking at doing for, Sunny Day Fund and others.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up that slow escalation. So it seems like once every 2 or 3 years, the average contribution amounts, or excuse me, the maximum contributions amounts for an IRA or a 401k keep going up. I remember when it was 17.5, then I look up now it's 18.5. I think now it's 22.5 for 401k, probably close to 23. As those limits are going up, the maximum limits, are you finding that from a kind of a behavioral science way, is that encouraging more people to save? Because it's like, oh my God, you can put even more money in. Now they may not max it out, but maybe next year they'll put in even more because they think, oh, I have more capacity to save. Did you find that from your work, Adam, or was that not the case?
Yeah, well, the easiest thing would first, even taking a step back, is if there was a company match and people weren't contributing up to the company match, we would really try to, hit these companies and people over the head with that fact. You're missing out on free money.
Yeah.
Companies being very generous, very giving. Please try to get at least up to that match. Now, as they're going up and everyone's expenses are going up and the costs that people will need to retire are going up, those that can are trying to max out, obviously, or just get as high as they can. It's nice the numbers kind of go up with, hopefully with salaries going up. I think that's kind of part of the key. Not everyone's salary goes up as much as inflation or as much as is needed. So that's always a struggle. But, for those that can, like I said, there's a lot of different benefits and things out there that are competing for people's money. So yes, it's certainly one way to help is these auto escalations.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Adam. And before we kind of, I like doing these webinars because I like to say, hey, how do we measure this stuff? How do we measure success and what's the next steps from here? But before we go on to that, I want to kind of go back to what Leigh mentioned earlier when we were talking briefly about, at SaverLife, how you celebrate, certain savings goals and certain milestones. Can you touch on a little bit, Leigh, the socio-emotional messaging of saving and what strategies you've learned that worked? And for that matter, if there was some that didn't work, can you talk to us about that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an element in the financial world that we overlook, right? Like we tend to come at this as a math problem, right? As much as a behavior circumstance problem. And so I think if you look at it, let me give you an example, right? So I think we all know people in our lives who, we all have that friend who's super frugal and really good with money and worries about money all the time. Mm-hmm. Then we have that other friend who spends everything, and doesn't worry about money at all, right? So people's attitudes around money are also quite diverse, right? As well as people's circumstances. And then, so if we look at people as a group and we say, it's quite common in our world to look at, personas and things like that. You may be two people who work at the same place and have a lot of similarities in terms of your financial circumstances, but be completely different in your goals, your aspirations, your behavior, your risk tolerance, right? Like people are very different in that way. So what we try to do at SaverLife is to look more to why are you here? What do you want out of this? What is the value that we can bring to you? And how do we communicate that to you in a way that works? So we did this experiment where we changed, we worked with Columbia University and did a personality test of people when they joined SaverLife and kind of matched that to there's a big 5 personality kind of index, right? That kind of types people based on their personalities. Then we developed text messages, prompts to save based on these different personality types. And then we had a control group and a treatment group. And the treatment group, so if you got a message that was, in line with your personality, your savings outcomes, you were 55% more likely to save than the control. So it's actually pretty impactful. We also had an experiment where we had the voices of kind of 3 different people that we that we modeled them on. One was Mother Teresa, which was the kind of everyone can do it, we got this kind of thing. One was Michelle Obama, who had more about they think we can, but let's prove them wrong. And then the other was Mr. T, who was like, if you don't save, that's a problem. And so other than having to explain.
I thought you were going to say, if you don't save, I'm going to beat you up, sucker.
I'm glad you said that instead of me. It doesn't work as well in my English accent, but yeah. So, and in addition to having to explain to the younger people in our team who Mr. T is, we also ran this experiment. And I don't know if you want to guess, Les, between Mother Teresa, Michelle Obama, and Mr. T, who had the greatest impact on saving.
Mr. T.
Michelle Obama.
Oh man,
so that message of, people don't think that we can, but we can. Let's prove it wrong. Actually really resonated with people. I think Mother Teresa was neutral and Mr. T actually had a negative impact on savings. So just some of the things that you can think about experimenting with that kind of go beyond the math and kind of really tap in a little bit to how people feel. I think Adam kind of touched on that as well, that it's very easy to feel a sense of overwhelming futility, right? Like, I'm never going to have $500,000 to send my kid to college or 1.5 million for retirement. So kind of like, that's not my circumstance. But I think the more you can tap into what people can achieve and build on those wins, then you see greater success.
That's fantastic. And of course, now it makes sense too, because Mr. T, you don't trust the guy saving money with all the gold chains. So that's another reason. Like, what are you saving on?
The gold is, I just saw an ad for gold the other day. I think, I know, Adam, is gold having a moment?
That's right. That's true.
I'm a fan of gold right now.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for that. I love that. It's really, really insightful. I appreciate you sharing that with us. We'll kind of start slowly landing the plane, as we have about 7 minutes left in the webinar. But let's move towards, how do we measure success in all this? We've talked for a long time about the backgrounds of how behavioral science and savings works, but how do we know if we're successful? I'll kind of start in reverse order of appearance. I'll start with you, Sid, then we'll go to Adam.
Sure thing. This is measuring success is something that we think about all the time. From an individual perspective, there's certainly, I say that with our team, that we don't complete our value cycle with any individual until that they have taken out money from their sunny day fund, right? That's when which by the way, we celebrate, to point out what that Leigh was making. Like, we should actually, in addition to the balances and everything else, we should also recognize, like, hey, guess what? People actually had money that they can count on when they needed it. That's a good thing. So measuring those withdrawals and making sure that people feel good about that, and also at the same time, how consistent are people when they've set goals for themselves. So whether that is specifically an emergency fund or another goal that they've set for themselves, how are they achieving those goals? How quickly, as well as whether they need to go back to changing those goals over time. From an employer perspective, we certainly think about the more business-oriented things as well. Like, hey, is this program something that people are actually participating in? And we're grateful to see really high participation rates on that side. It may start out around 30%, but we are quickly seeing that climb to around 60% over time. And that's fantastic, and higher in some organizations as well. We're seeing balances over $2,000, especially for individuals that are making $18 to $23 an hour. That is incredible that we're able to not just crush that $400 Federal Reserve statistic, but actually create meaningful financial cushions. And as a result, and this is the next thing that we're starting to measure, and what is the impact on 401k loans and hardship withdrawals? I think Leigh, you were either you or Adam or Brian were mentioning the Urban Institute related study around how that was, when you have that amount of savings, what that actually means, not just from like a 401k asset protection perspective, but like of other assets and rent and related impact as well. So those are some of the ways that we've been looking at it. I think fundamentally, it all comes back to the individual and the stories that are shared with us, the testimonials that are shared with us. Folks that have opened their very first bank accounts in some cases, to folks that are celebrating their kids' graduations and something that they've saved up for over time. It's those types of stories that really fulfill our own desire to be successful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Sid. What about you, Adam? How is succession measured in this?
Yeah, so we ask that question, what does success look like in everything we do? And we think it's one of the most important questions out there. So achievable, measurable goals, both for the employees and for the employers. For the employees, it could be something like, did they drop the 9th movie streaming service that they have to participate in this plan? Are they kind of taking advantage of the generous, company amount that a match that the company might be putting in? As Sid mentioned, is it 401k loans decreasing? Are people not going into credit card debt at a 25% APR that they may never get out of, or it's going to take a number of years? So the number, the take rates by the employers, by the employees of these employers, the number of employers that are signing up, these are things, it's a benefit that everyone, both companies and people should want to take advantage of. And, hopefully the numbers will play out like that, but there are certainly achievable, measurable statistics that kind of we need to make sure we hit in that regard.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate that. And good seeing you again. Brian.
I feel like there's a really comprehensive answer. So maybe I'll say in the short term, increased financial confidence and ability to manage those unexpected expenses, and just that feeling of, you're have a little bit of security. Ultimately, over the long term, we hope these efforts to cover that short-term security lead to more long-term financial well-being and wealth building, but that's going to take, time to see play out. So we're in the early days of these emergency savings workplace benefits. I think in the immediate term, how is it helping people avoid high cost ways to address unexpected expenses and have that cushion? And then, over the long term, is it getting them on those pathway to those longer term goals, home ownership, paying for, children's college, entrepreneurship, or just having that, being able to think about retirement savings and retiring in the long term.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. It's always great seeing you again. And finally, Leigh.
Well, this is a question I spend a lot of my time thinking about, because particularly in emergency savings, you're really looking at, as Adam was saying, is the real measure there that you didn't go into debt. Like, is this something beyond savings? And I think you can't measure it in the same way that you might measure 401k. It's not always going to be an up and to the right trajectory. That's not what success looks like. It may be a lot more like this. So, we look at savings consistency. We do look at net gains and saving, because also that's the point, right? For our members, the number one thing that people say they want to achieve is to no longer let money control their lives. So I think that back to that, what does that mean to people, right? What does it mean to be able to sleep well at night, knowing that you can pay the bills, but also how do you feel on track for your goals? And I think that we've done a lot of work trying to think about how we measure the impact of emergency savings and kind of look at financial health overall, which is great, but we cannot lose sight of what the ultimate purpose is, right? Which is for more people to be able to achieve their financial goals and economic mobility for themselves and their families. And so I think we're still falling a little short of that, Les, and I think that we have more work to be done there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Leigh. And as always, it's great seeing you again too. That we're kind of coming near the end of this, and I'll ask my team who's doing all the slide sharing, if you can share those last few slides while they're getting that queued up. And while that's coming up, I will say that we're going to have another webinar. We'd like to do these once every few months or so. But as we start getting closer towards the end of the year, I can't believe we're saying that because we're about midway through. We're going to start talking about strategies that are related towards, what can you do to help employees when it comes to budget and managing money, because a lot of holiday time is coming up. That means spending money on trips and gifts for Kwanzaa, for Christmas, right? For Hanukkah. That's all coming up, and so we're going to address those during the next webinar to come. We do have, and this is something that I like to share because there's several brokers and some 401k providers and retirement specialists that attend. We do have a nice succinct package. For those who are interested in learning more about Sunny Day Fund, we do have a package that we can give to you. Again, reply back to the email that you're going to get with a copy of this link. You know how to contact all of us, by the way, at Sunny Day Fund, because many of you I've spoken to, or Sid has spoken to you as well. And finally, there is that last slide. I don't know, Sid, if we have that queued up. It just has their names, LinkedIn, and,
yes.
and Leigh?
I appreciate that. Looks like we're having an issue with sharing.
Okay.
Apologies on that end. What we will do is that I think there was some great research that was mentioned by everyone today. We'll package all that up along with that slide with the LinkedIn details and share it to the registrants. And that way they're getting some of the articles that were dropped in the chat here today as well.
That'll be great. Yes, that's an even better idea. You're going to get a nice takeaway. Your homework assignment from this webinar is to take a look at all these detailed things that we presented. I know several of us did post things in the chat. Thank you, Leigh, Brian, and Adam. Some of the useful things that we can use. I want to give a round of applause, virtual or otherwise, to Leigh, Brian, Adam, and of course Sid. You guys did a fantastic job. Thank you for your time. It's always fun learning and speaking with you, both in the preparation for this and, of course, during the presentation itself. So attendees, you will get an email summarizing everything. And I will say this, and with a heartfelt expression and meaning, have a sunny day, everybody. Thank you for joining us.